There was Lana Turner, there was Nail File Nanette, there was Judy Canova, Rosie Slombom, Christine de Winter, Gladys and Diane, they were brothers, Pearl of the Pacific.
And were they names from movie stars or what?
Some of them were, yeah, some of them were. Pearl of the Pacific came from some show road. Nail File Nanette used to carry a big nail file with her and she'd stab people with it if they upset her or him. Christine de Winter was the nom de plume I used to use, and I got de Winter from a movie called Rebecca. Her name was Rebecca.The Winter, and they used to call me Christine de Winter because the name sounded good. And Rosie Slombom, they actually got that. But Lana Turner and all those people, they were all, a lot of them got their movie names, you know what I mean?
And how did you find those boys? What sort of coded relationship did you have to have for the? They were obviously the people you identified with.
Yeah.
And how did you come across those people?
There used to be a pub in Brisbane called the Grand Central, which was a gay hotel. One down the road was Her Majesty, that was a gay hotel, and up the top of that in Mulholland's, it was a gay hotel. All the working girls used to drink upstairs there at Mulholland's, up the top, and then further up there was the Carlton, which was a very upmarket, all the upmarket moles used to get there. But the people that I used to get around were mainly the gay community, but there were a lot of gay people that were very high class. They wouldn't mix with us because they thought we were beneath them type of thing, you know, because they had we used to go to the different, like there was a place where you go to have coffee just near Wallace Bishop's opposite the City Hall called the Casamara, and you'd go there and everybody would go, like straight people and gay people, mainly gay, but you'd often get the straight people going there, just go and have a cup of tea and a sandwich, and it cost you about threepence or something, and that was a lot of money in those days, you know. And two gay guys owned it, and they were there for years. And then there was another one down near the valley. They called it the Pink Elephant, and that was always getting raided by the police and things like that. And the police were very much down on the gay community at those times, very much.
And so the arrests and things like that, people were policing gay beats or gay...
Well, yeah, the gay beats were people were always getting arrested in them, you know. Police used to hang around and watch and see what was going on. A friend of mine who was a nurse, he got caught in the toilet by an undercover copper, and he had to go to court, but unfortunately, when he went to court, it came out that the policeman put his hand on him first, so the judge threw it out of court. So he was a bit fearful of getting struck off, you know, his registration stopped. But it all came out that the copper had made an advance to him first, you know. And but they used to often raid the police. And when you see people running in all directions, you know. There was one up at Spring Hill in the park up there, and the police would swoop, and then there'd be people running like ferrets in all directions, and police running after them, you know. And it was the same in town. They had one Roma Street, there was a toilet went down right at the tram stop, and opposite the Transcontinental Hotel, that was one there. And there was quite a few of them around, the gay toilets. Opposite the Blue Moon, on the other side, the bridge, there was a gay toilet there, and it was quite frequented because a lot of gay people used to walk across the bridge, back and forth across the bridge, and the Americans got to know, all the gay Americans got to know all these places too, you know what I mean?
So it was a way of picking up gay.
Yeah, that was a way of doing it. Yeah. Was to they knew where you were, sort of thing. You know what I mean? And by word of mouth, it had travelled through the gay sailors and that sort of thing. And then it got to the stage. A lot of the Americans, if they wanted to go home to America, they'd pretend they were gay, and they'd be sent back on a Section 8, which is a dishonourable discharge, but they didn't care. And they'd see them going down Queen Street of a Saturday night with handkerchiefs tied on their head and swishing down the street and carrying on, so they'd be noticed by the military police, you know. And even in those days, the American Negroes couldn't come over the bridge, across the other side of the bridge, you know.
So, where did you hang out most of that time?
Oh, I used to hang out, there was a Lennon's Hotel, and General MacArthur had a suite there, and I worked in his suite at one time as a waiter. You know, we were designated to these areas, and I worked there, and it was all like he had a whole floor up there on Lennon's in George Street, and a lot of the Americans used to go there, and I worked in different places. I worked at Lennon's, I worked at the old Bellevue, which was an army officers' place. Only American officers stayed there. I worked there, and we used to they'd have a dance of a Saturday night, and there was no alcohol was not supposed to come in, but they used to bring it in, and I'd sell. They'd wanted a bottle opener, so I'd sell them one £5. But £5 in those days was a lot of bread, and you sell it to them. Then when they were up dancing, you go and take it off the table, and then they'd come in, hey, can you get us another one of those bottles? I was like, yeah, and I get another. And then after we'd finished work, we'd have a hire car pick us up. Me and the other gay waiters, we'd get a hire car, a big black car, Miller's hire car, and they were at Lennon's. We'd drive up to near Lennon's was a pie cart, and we'd pull up in this big limousine and all have pies and that. With the money, we'd fleece off the Yanks, you know what I mean? Yeah.
And you had a number of boyfriends, American boyfriends?
Oh, lots of friends, yes, yeah. And they were quite chaotic too. You know, many ones.
So, you talked a bit about your employment history, but you'd had other jobs. You worked at Wacol, at Goodna.
I worked at Goodna Mental Institution. I was younger there. I went to work there.
Was that before the war?
It was just before the war. Yeah, just before the war. I went there. I was quite young. I can't remember the age. It might have been 16, 17 or something. There was no sort of age set. It was about 16, 17. Because I remember going there to work. And I stayed there for maybe 12 months before I left, and it was too difficult. Then I think the war was coming on, and the Yanks were coming. Then I wasn't interested because it was a long way to travel. You had to travel in the train. You'd have to get out at Goodna, and not Goodna, at Wacol. You'd have to walk up through the golf floors. It was quite a hike up, you know. And in those days, it was very primitive, a very primitive psychiatric hospital. It was the first one I'd worked in. So it was all new to me, and it was all a bit frightening. Some of the things that happened and I'd seen in there, you know, it was all very frightening.
And who was the matron at that time?
There was a matron Heaney and a matron Richardson. The one was a big woman, and the other was smaller statue, and they were very severe, you know. You'd be going to lectures, and then the old building's still there, the old administration's still there at Goodna now. And you used to be going to lectures, you'd be going up, and because I'd be wandering around, dawdling along, talking to the other female nurses and that, and then she'd put her hand and say, Mr. Tomkins, hurry off to your lectures, there's something to those word nurses. And I'd have to hurry off to the bloody lectures, you know. But it was all interesting stuff, and the things that happened were amazing. I remember that the matrons also, they'd just come out of a starch box. Their white uniform was white, and they'd have the red cape and the red umbrella, you know, and their veils were stiff and flowing, and they'd come and do a round. I remember I was in the female section for a while when I first started there, and we had a big old sister there, nursing sister, Smith, doesn't matter, and she was lovely, a big fat lady, but very, very kind. And I remember one day matron came to do a round, and she walks in, and of course one of the patients was on the scoot, which we used to call the scoot, they were going off, and she used to sit in the window that had big bars on, but she'd sit up there like a little monkey curled up in the window, and she came in, and we'd all have to go with the sister of the matron, like an entourage, and the sister said to her matron, be careful of Miss whatever her name was, she's a bit on the scoot at the moment, she's a bit off, and she said, it's all right, sister, I know what I'm doing. And then she went, and the next minute she comes sliding out on her ass out the door with the umbrella between her legs, the veil off her head, and this woman screaming on top of her, because we all run to get it off. But it looked so funny. He was a uniform all dirty, and her veil off, and the umbrella stuck up between her legs. She just jumped up and grabbed it, you know what I mean? And then another day there was one of the doctors come around, the same thing happened, And she said to him, be careful, this lady's on the scoot. And she'd sit there, and we're all standing at the door, see, and she said, be careful of her doctor, because she's really going off. She attacked matron the other day. Sister, I'm the doctor, I know what I'm doing. And so he goes in and she's saying, oh, doctor, they're really cruel to me, they're horrible, they do these dreadful things to me. Oh, you know what's like it here, doctor? Because he gets over and he went to pat her on the shoulder and she grabbed him by the fucking tie and slid the knot up into his throat and he choked him. And we had to run in and get him out of there, And he said, give her formaldehyde, give her the formaldehyde, get it. I'll never forget. It was just so funny. And this is the little incident, and there's another lady, I remember she used to swing in and out the food used to come around in big drums, big silver drums, the food was mostly mush stuff, and they come around the horse and carts, and I saw this old lady sitting there and been there for a number of years, and she was schizophrenic, and very bad schizophrenic, and she'd sit there and harm nobody, had put all the stones around, and she'd keep talking about Judge McCrossing. Judge McCrossing, you're a liar, I didn't do that at all, you rotten old thing, Then she'd just continue on talking, And then one day one of the patient came in and said, Mr. Tomkins, come out and look. And here she's swinging between the horse's legs on the draft, the shafts of the thing. And but she's had a dress made out of an old sack, sugarcane sacks.
Really?
Yeah, but it was a very interesting place.
How did it make you, when you first went there, how did it make you feel in terms of you were employed there to look after people? What did you think of the people you were?
I had compassion for them, because they had a ward there that was called a refractory ward, and it was the most dreadful thing I'll never forget. They'd only leave you there for about an hour at the most, and you'd go into it, and you'd walk in, and it was downstairs. They were the old brick buildings are still there, and it was down in the basement, and these people, you walk in, and it was like walking to another world. They're just wandering around, some with shoes on, some with no shoes on, no clothes on, some with no clothes on, and they were just completely in oblivion. They just walk, and they'd walk towards you, and they just whiz around. They wouldn't hit you, they just move around you. And it was like being in a fantasy of world of, like when you're in a drug haze, everything slows down and everything becomes so unreal. And you see these people, and I think, isn't it dreadful for these poor people to be really existing like this?
Did you have any understanding of what they were experiencing and why, or did
Not
you
really.
have to learn?
Not really. I had to learn about it. And we had a little old nun there. There was another one, a little tiny thing, and she used to have tomato boxes made like an altar. Like the tomato box, she had them like a lord, and she'd prayed a lot. And I remember one day, in those days we didn't have communication they've got now. We had like big postman's whistle, like railway whistles, big whistles, the big silver ones on our belts. And if you got into trouble, you'd blow them. And if you heard a whistle go, you'd always run to wherever you heard the whistle. And I ran down the stage, and here's these two big nurses, great big bull dyke nurses, on the ground, and this little old nun on the top of them punching shit out of them, belting cries out of them. Just amazing, this little frail old nun. And all of a sudden, they gain this super strength, you know what I mean? It's just phenomenal.
Did you feel frightened? Did you feel at risk there?
I did, at different times, because one night I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. I was sitting, at night sometimes we'd have the wards, the rooms would be around, but then they'd have like a room where they had the radio going, and they had books, they could sit there and talk, and just do what they wanted, do what they wanted to wander. And I said I was sitting there that night, I'll never forget, and I was reading a book, which I shouldn't have been doing anyway, and I had my back to the ward. And I said, the next thing, I've got to somebody grabbed me by around the throat with their arm, in the pit of their arm. And being sitting in the high back chair, I couldn't get around, couldn't do anything, and I just couldn't get around. And I put my whistle up to blow to my mouth. I got it in my mouth, and they hit the cord. I thought I lost my teeth. They hit the cord, knocked it out of my mouth. And then some of the good patients come over and grab them, and then they started to yell out to the other nurse in the other ward and bang on the door, and they come running through. One of them blew my whistle, and they come running through and got the patient. And I was so angry, which I regretted later, and I hit the patient. I think it was more in fear than anything else. It wasn't to reprise, I was just so fearful. And I struck out at the patient, just with a bare hand, but I didn't punch, I just smacked them. And then I realised I shouldn't have done that, and I felt very guilty about doing that, I mean, I've never ever done it again to anybody. But I think it was just the fear and what had happened at that moment. Dying.
What sort of training did you get when you went there to work?
It's very simple training. It was very simple. There was a little book that came out. I'll see if I can find a little blue book. It's only small, but very basic stuff, you know. Nothing really technical. But they'd have shock treatment there in those days, and cardio-assault treatment, which I found very distressing for me, because like when they give them the cardio-assault, it'd burn the sugar content of their body, and they'd go into a, you know, like a hyper, because all the sugar's gone. And then what would you do? You have a bit of hose and you put it down their throat with a funnel. Some would drink the glucose for you, and others wouldn't. They'd fight. And you put the funnel down their mouth and just pour it down the funnel. And to me that was really barbaric. I hated it. We had a doctor there who was very nasty to the patients. If they wouldn't drink it, he'd hit them. And I found that really, to me that was distressing, you know, to see this man doing this to these patients, and it was very, very hard. And I remember one time there, I'd been doing the shock treatment in the morning with the other staff, and you'd have the patient would lay on the bed, and there'd be 3 nursing staff down each side of them, and the sister would stand at the top with the doctor he'd do the machine, then you'd swab with normal saline in the temples, and you'd put the clamps on, and then you'd all hold the patient gently, so that when they went into spasm, shock into spasm, they wouldn't injure themselves. And then sometimes if somebody actually touched the machine up the top, we'd all get a bolt of the shock treatment, which didn't hurt us anyway. But I remember this day we'd had a really busy morning, and I was looking for this. It's amazing how we think sometimes. And I remember they said, "Oh, get Miss," I won't mention her name, she was a very well-known doctor's wife. So I won't mention them, and I went out to look for her. I said, "Say, Mrs. Jones, where are you?" She said, "I'm here." I said, "Well, come down here and come on, hurry yourself up." And she was a very dignified lady, and she walked down the steps and she looked at me and said, "Mr. Tomkins, don't speak to me like that, please." And I was so humbled by that. I thought, I said, "Look, I'm sorry. You know, would you please come down if you're having shock?" And she said, "Yes, thank you, that's a better attitude." And I felt really demeaned not demeaned, I was demeaning her by the way I spoke. But there again, I'm a human being, you know. But I never ever punched or did. I've seen what's happened.
Some of the other things you might have seen with other staff, was there ever a way of that would have distressed you initially, and was there a way of addressing that, or is it just people kept quiet about it?
You didn't speak about it. You didn't. You knew what was happening, and at that time we were going to get a few foreign people coming into the place, and I found them very heartless and very cruel to the patients. I'd seen something there. Sometimes in the shower they'd hit them with a towel, the wet towels, because if you hit this patient with a wet towel it won't leave a bruise, you know, and they'd punish them by doing that, and treat them very badly sometimes. And some of the Australian as well did the same thing, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of people that worked in that area probably had a lot of problems of their own, and I think a lot of them probably had alcohol problems as well, and medication problems, because medication in those days was so easy to access in the wards, you know what I mean? There was no sort of rigid stuff, you just signed the book.
Do you think there was some drug abuse among staff?
I'm sure there would have been, you know.
And so you stayed only for a year?
Yeah.
There.
And then the Americans were there, and then I decided I didn't want to have to go all there to work. So then I went to I worked in all sorts of things, you know. I worked in a foundry for a while, which was hideous. I hated it because you were filthy dirty, and Mum thought it'd be good for me. We were living in Petrie Terrace at the time, in the old houses there on Petrie Terrace, and and she said it'll be good for me to get a job, you know, and work manual in a foundry, but it wasn't good for me. I hated it, shoveling this bloody sand and taking these big weights, and then I had to go on.
And what was one of the things, Brisbane in that time during the war, what are some of the significant things that you remember as happening?
Well, one incident that happened was a pretty big incident. We were in the Regent Theatre one Saturday night, I think it was it's Friday or Saturday night, I can't remember. And of course, there was me and Johnny Butler, there was me and John and Gladys and Diane, 2 other gay boys, and came up on the screen, "Please don't leave the theatre, there's trouble in the streets." And they came up, we ran out the theatre to see what it was about. So we scooted off down Queen Street, and it was down at the American PX. It was opposite the Gresham Hotel on the corner of Eagle Street, I think it is. Eagle Street. It was on the corner anyway. It later became Ansett Airways, or it was, and then the Americans took it over. It was Ansett, and then the Americans took it over as a PX store, like a canteen, and that. And there were guys there with the guns and everything like that. And what had actually happened was, I think there's different stories about it, and what had actually happened was these Australian sailors went in there drunk and wanted cigarettes, and they didn't have enough of their own troops at that time, and they were denied the cigarettes. And then the soldiers got very angry about it and started to fight. And of course, then all hell broke loose. And then all the Australian diggers were there, and then the Americans were there, and then the MPs came, and the guns were going off. And that was the whole episode. And it was quite traumatic there for quite a while, you know. And the police, they'd cordoned off the whole area then with the military police with the Americans. And the Americans were very drunk, very gun mad, you know, with guns. And it was fortunate there wasn't some people killed at that particular time. And just down from there, on the corner of Creek Street, there was a memorial there, I'll never forget, a memorial there to some sort of memorial. It's still there today, and the top was off it for years, and the soldier had climbed up there one night drunk, and grabbed hold of the top of that thing, and it broke with him and fell down and he was killed. Yeah, an Australian army soldier, yeah. You don't hear much about that, but I think it's been replaced, the top, I'm not sure. But the top of it was knocked off, and it was there for years, you know.
And do you remember when the war finished?
I remember the war finished. When did it finish? I was working at a place up on the terrace. That's right. I was working up at a place called Monte. It's still up there today on Wickham Terrace, just near the old observatory there. And the American nurses had taken it over, and I became a houseboy there. And I remember VE Day or something was on. And we were out there throwing toilet paper off the verandas.
So that was the announcement
that the war was finishing, yeah. And we were up there throwing the toilet paper off the wall. And then it was sometimes before the Yanks went. But at that stage, before that, I'd worked, that's right, the Dutch army came, and they had a place out of Wacol Army Camp. There was an army camp out there, and the Dutch took over that. And I went out there to work in the Red Cross in the ward. In a ward there, and the people that came there were people that came back from Indonesia and Java that had been in the concentration camps, and they were just like skeletons, you know, they're berry and scurvy, and they were really pathetic to see. And I'd never come across discrimination in my days. We didn't know what was about in those days. But I remember between the barrack things, between these barracky things, they'd have. You should walk on planks that you'd walk along, because if it rained it'd all get muddy. And I remember walking up on and these Indonesian soldiers walking towards me, and they had to step off in the mud to let me go past because I was white. And I couldn't understand that. It was very foreign to me, and I said, no, it's okay, don't worry. But they said, no, sir, we cannot, because I wore an officer's uniform, you know. And it was very difficult, because I'd never seen that before. And then I used to drink. They had an Indonesian club just across from the hospital block that I was in, working. And I'd go there to have a drink with the Indonesian boys and the military police that came and go, "Sir, I'm sorry, you'll have to leave. You can't be in here. You have to go to the officers' club up on the hill." I said, "No, it's all right." They said, no, sir, you cannot be here. You have to leave. You know? That was the first discrimination I ever came across then. Of course, then when the Americans couldn't come over the bridge, that was on too. That was before I actually worked at...
So you had contact with the American Negroes.
Yes,
but then
not a great deal of contact, because they weren't allowed over the bridge. They had to stay on the south. And because when we go over to the Blue Moon skating ring, they'd be there. We'd see them. But they weren't. If they came across the bridge, the MPs had just taken straight back across the other side of the bridge, and they weren't allowed over on this side of the city. You know, very discriminatory. And then there was poor old Bijou. Bijou got caught up in Ann Street behind the signboards with an American officer screwing him. And it was a big thing in Brisbane in those days. The police caught them. and it was in the paper, you know, and the judge had said to Bijou, Mr. So-and-so, why were you doing that? And he said, oh, Your Honour, I was hungry. I wanted to buy a pie. And it came out in the big newspaper in big headlines, O for a pie, wacko for a watermelon. And it was a big thing around Brisbane. And then poor old Judy Canova, Judy had pinched all this American money and thing and sucked it up his anus. And he got eventually they caught him, they got arrested him and took him, he was in drag, and they took him to the CIB and they had to get all this money out of his anus. It was a dreadful turnout.
And what was that in the newspaper?
That was in the paper, yeah.
What was the headline?
Human money box caught stealing Americans' money. He went to Monterey for that for a couple of months. Yeah.
And you had a run-in with the police one night?
Oh yes, we were coming up George Street one night, me and Gladys. And Gladys, we were tall, we were about 6 foot tall, and we mooched up there, and all of a sudden I had a pair of clogs on my feet, and the clogs had broken, and we were sitting down on these, had these big pipes down the road for water, for the air raids and all that sort of thing. And I was sitting there hammering my shoe with my dress pulled up and hammering the shoe to get it fixed. And these two police officers come over and asked them what we were doing. And then they suddenly realised that we'd gone to school with them, and we were two blokes. So they said, come, we're going to take them to the CIB. I said we had to walk all the full length, all the way from George Street, right down to the CIB, which is now behind the casino. It's on the Queen Victoria Park. It was a big CIB there. And we had to walk, everybody's looking at us. I said, come on, we might as well slip our arms. And we hooked arms with these coppers and waltzed up the street, twisting along badly in our long evening gowns. And then it was in the paper about two young men being caught, seen swishing down the street the other night. It was two well-dressed young ladies in gear that the well-dressed ladies would love to be wearing. And two police officers noticed they were two blokes they'd gone to school with. And they were hustled off quickly to the CIB, but were let go later when they turned out they were going to a party at Spring Hill. And the police officers warned them they could be in trouble of being molested by servicemen. And we had to walk all the way down Queen Street, and of course Gladdy was very upset about it all and was walking like a big wallflower, and everybody's looking at one side of this American saying, hey, there goes Eleanor Roosevelt, have a look at Eleanor striding down there. And I said, walk quick, walk slower, Gladys. And then she slipped over her handbag and fell over in the alleyway. Oh, hilarious. And of course, one of the congregating places was the Shrine of Remembrance opposite the city railway station. There was a war memorial there. And so that was a very gay place because there was the park down the bottom. And then three girls used to go there. We used to call them the Anzac Elephants. They were three sisters, really big girls. Big, rough girls. And they'd be fighting and punching, and the coppers would come and grab them. They'd punch the coppers, and they'd be screaming at them. It was dreadful. I remember when I was pissing down with rain, and we're standing on the railway station looking, and Bijou standing there with a little pair of shorts and the mincy legs with an umbrella, standing over there, the rain pouring down on him, waiting for an American to come along. Dear. But in those days, police were very, very severe on the gay community, very severe. You get a copper that was, a bit more compassionate,
But mostly no compassion.
None at all, no. That's just as quick if you punch in the mouth or kick your ass or anything like that. And then there was nothing to do with violence because you were frightened to go and to do anything about it at any rate, you know what I mean? And I mean, the night we went down, they took us down to the CIB. This police officer sergeant there made us lift our dresses up and show us our penises to make sure we were really, really blokes. But I think he probably got a precarious thrill out of that, Yeah? And it worked out. The two police officers that picked us up, one of the brothers turned out gay at any rate. So how ironic could it be?
Thank you, Ron. That covers a number of things that
That's only the beginning.
I know that, I understand that. And we will do this again and have another conversation about that.
Well, look, I look forward to that. Nobody hears us, do they?
No.
Well, can I just sing something?
No.
One day at a time, sweet Jesus.